Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight's legislative forum hosted by the Bloomington Public Schools Advocacy Council. My name is Dennis Kane. As Advocacy Council Chair, it is my honor to moderate tonight's legislative forum. With formal introductions following shortly, special thanks to Advocacy Council members, Bloomington School Board, Superintendent Les Fujitake, Rick Kaufman, Executive Director of Community Relations and Emergency Management, and Dr. Nicholas Kelley, the Acting Administrator of Bloomington Public Schools, for joining us this evening. By way of reminders, please mute your microphone unless speaking, and we want to see faces, not images or icons for those participating. And last, of course, but not at least, is that Beck TV is telecasting this meeting tonight. So if people are interested in seeing that, there's a schedule published for several times that program will be viewed. After a very busy and, shall we say, interesting election session, it is an honor to welcome and congratulate our Bloomington legislators on your re-election to the State Senate and House. Thank you for participating in tonight's forum. We sincerely appreciate your devotion and support given to education bills that continue to benefit public education and our school district. Special thanks to Representative Steve Elkins for reaching out to me and asking me earlier if the Advocacy Council had planned a meeting with the board. That led to a discussion and conversation, I should say, that led to the thought that we should do this, obviously, in a virtual setting. And I'm grateful for that conversation. But before I introduce our legislators, I invite School Board Chair and Advocacy Council Member, Ms. Nellie Corman, to welcome you and introduce members of the school board and administration who are joining this program this evening. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. On behalf of my fellow board members, welcome to tonight's forum. We appreciate the opportunity to hear from our distinguished legislators and interact on important educational issues. It is my pleasure to introduce my fellow board members, Vice Chair Tom Bennett, Director Beth Beebe, Director Maya Olson, Director Jean Sorum, Director Heather Starks, and Director Don Steiga, who's also an ad hoc member with me on the Bloomington Advocacy Council. We are all facing challenging times with the pandemic and its impact on residents, businesses, and our schools. And while attention is rightfully centered on how best to keep all of us safe in this dangerous time of rising cases, as a school board, we must also consider the impact the pandemic has had on our students, families, and staff. What would public education look in a post-pandemic world? How do we address the persistent challenges we have faced for years and the new problems created by the financial strains of the pandemic on schools? From challenges come opportunities. We are confident that together with our citizens, our business community, and you, our dedicated legislators, we will tackle these challenges. Thank you for your past and continued leadership and continued support. With that, I will turn it back to our moderator, Mr. Dennis Kane.
Thank you, Chair Corman. Now, a few words regarding the Advocacy Council. In addition to the board representatives, Nellie Corman, who just spoke, and Don Steigaff, the Advocacy Council consists of Lynn Shear, Addie Matson, Don Starrott, Stacy Wells, Stephanie Johnson, and Patty Artiel. The Advocacy Council is an independent group of citizens that monitor legislative activity as it affects K through 12 education and advocates positions on behalf of the district. The Advocacy Council annually recommends a district legislative platform to the board, advocates for the approved platform, and communicates with district residents and elected officials about legislative issues. I now invite our legislators by way of self-introduction to share a little bit about themselves, and if it is known, please give us your committee assignments for the upcoming legislative session. And we will start with Senator Melisa Halverson-Wicklund, who represents District 50.
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate the invitation to be here tonight, and I appreciate your having this forum, this opportunity for us to interact with the board and the advisory council and advocacy council, excuse me, and have a chance to talk with you about issues before we get into session. I do serve District 50, which is a lot of Bloomington and then part of Richfield. And I'm excited excited to be going back into session in January, but also we're facing a lot of new difficult challenges, and I'm trying to prepare for that. I just want to say I really appreciate and want to thank all the families and students for all of the hard work that they're doing this school year to adapt and face the challenges that we're in right now due to the COVID pandemic. And thank you to teachers and staff and the school board. I know that you're having to make extremely difficult decisions on a daily basis, and these are times that none of us have great preparation for, and I really appreciate all the work you're doing to make the school year as successful as possible. I do not know what committees that I will be on next session. The majority party hasn't laid out their committee formation yet. I will certainly be asking to be on the Health and Human Services Committee again because I want to continue work in that area, as well as possibly education. I really want to focus on early childhood and continue to work in that area. So those are a couple areas that I will definitely request, but we'll have to see how the committee structure is laid out. So again, thanks for having us tonight. Look forward to hearing about your concerns and challenges. So thanks.
Thank you, Senator Wicklund. Next, we have with us this evening is Representative Andrew Carlson, representing District 50B. I think you're muted.
Happens more often than you think, right? Sorry about that. Again, thank you, Dennis, for the invitation and for bringing us all together in advance of the upcoming legislative session. As Senator Wicklund did mention, the legislature will definitely face some challenges in 2021. So in hearing from community members from a variety of perspectives, I think it's going to be extremely helpful in informing how we move forward. So again, this will be extremely vital in terms of our thought processes going into the 2021 legislative session. As Senator Wicklund did mention, we don't have committee assignments yet, but currently I serve as the chair of the Property Tax Division. I serve on the Full Tax Committee. So both of those I'm sure will be extremely busy in the upcoming session. Commerce, Judiciary are my remaining committees. So whether those same committee structure holds for the next session in this kind of COVID era will be determined. So there is a bit of wait and see. But again, thank you for bringing us together today and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. If I'm seeing correctly, then we can introduce the other legislators and that are coming, unless they're there. If they join us, I'll call the attention to them introducing themselves as they join us. Is that acceptable to everyone?
Kane, they're
Okay,
all
good.
in attendance.
Say again.
They're all in attendance.
Are they?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, then that's good. Let's go to Senator Melisa Franzen. She represents District 49.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you, Superintendent Fujitake and Chair
There.
Corman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I represent Senate District 49, which includes the communities of Edina, West Bloomington, portions of Eden Prairie, Minnetonka. This is my third term, so this is going on 8 years and 2 more coming with this new term. It's a census year and redistricting year, so that's why it's a 2-year for the Senate this time around. It's a really a privilege to serve the community. I also am a mom of 2 little boys, a 3.5-year-old preschool child care setting and a 5-year-old kindergarten student at Normandale Elementary in Edina. And I will tell you, no one can prepare you to send your child to kindergarten during a pandemic. And it has been a challenge, very emotional parts of it. Just on Friday, we received a late email that we will no longer be seeing each other in person. And obviously a lot of families are grappling with this and in the entire state. We chose to send our child 4 days a week to a kindergarten setting, and then 1 off day for asynchronous teaching. And now we have to do all this virtual learning, and starting this week, starting today. So juggling 2 kids of those ages in work and my husband working full time. I am one of those families, just like all of you. And it's been a challenge, but I have certainly appreciated everything that the school districts are doing across the state to keep teachers safe, to keep students safe, to notify us of any potential risk. And I just want to say thank you for all the extra effort. It's heroic, and certainly it will not go unnoticed for decades, if not generations to come, what we're going through.
Yes.
Thank you. So I currently sit on a full finance committee in the Senate, also on transportation and health and human services finance committees. I would like to continue to be on the full finance committee and the health and human services finance committee as well. We have a new class of legislators coming in, even in our caucus and the DFL side, that are great, and you'll get to know them, I'm sure. So I'm probably going to focus on those for first 2 committees, finance and HHS, and maybe make way for others to be part of the transportation committee. But I do have to say, again, that the work that we have ahead with the budget deficit and with all the needs that we have in our health and human services division, as well as the needs that we have for education, those 2 subjects are going to be the core of our discussions. And it's going to be very challenging to do it remotely, but certainly we want to keep safe in the holidays and beyond, because this session is going to be unlike any other session we've ever had to deal with when it comes to a budget year. So thank you again for having this discussion. Looking forward to the questions, and certainly this for me is very personal for what I just laid out. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Franzen. Next, we will hear from Representative Steve Elkins, representing District 49B.
Hello, everyone. I don't know what committees I'll be signing on this year, because we haven't settled on the committee structure, but I hope to continue working certainly on transportation and commerce among several. Last time I had 5 committees, but I reached out to Dennis and company to set this up, mostly so we could listen to you guys, because we're getting tons of questions from our constituents about what is the learning environment like right now, and why can't my kids be there in person. So I'm hoping that we come away from this with some better information to answer the questions that we're getting from our constituents about, why is the district choosing the learning options that it is right now during this epidemic, so that we can answer those questions intelligently. Thanks.
Thank you, Representative Elkins. And Representative Michael Howard, representing District 50A, brings us to his comments.
Thank you all. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to listen. As Representative Elkin said, during this pandemic, every public institution and its leaders are faced with really difficult choices, but I think our local school boards and our education institutions have faced some of the most challenging decisions. And like Senator Franzen, I've got a kindergartner that's doing school via Zoom. It's not easy. Families are facing such challenging situations. And what I hope to get out tonight is to listen and to figure out how best that we as legislators can support the amazing work that you're all doing here. And so look forward to the conversation.
Good. Thank you, Representative Howard, and congratulations on passing the Alex Smith Emergency Insulin Act.
Thank you. And thanks to Senator Wickland and basically everyone on this call too.
Senator Wickland, you did work on that, and we're very grateful. The value of the legislative forum is to have time to discuss likely issues facing legislators in the upcoming session, which is set to begin Tuesday, January 5th, 2021, and conclude on May 17th, 2021. We have identified 4 issues for your comments. The first one is the budget deficit. And I will just lead in with this comment. Minnesota lawmakers face a potential of $4.7 billion in deficit in the next 2-year budget cycle as the pandemic continues to gobble up more resources than state revenues generate. Legislators, what can we expect the Senate and the House to do to address this deficit, and how may that action impact public education? Open to whoever.
I can get a start, at least in the Senate. I do sit with Senator Wickland in the minority party, so we are not in charge of the committee assignments in terms of how many committees we're going to have, or really set the stage for the bills coming up. Usually we try to be as bipartisan as we can, but certainly politics gets in the way. In a budget year, we have divided legislature. That's what the voters decided with this election, and we have to honor that and do their best to work together. This budget affects all of us, no matter what party, no matter what part of the state you're part of. And I do expect that there's going to be some major differences of how we're going to tackle the budget. We've already heard from the Republican majority saying that they want a flat budget cuts across the board with agencies. And I believe the agencies are doing as much as they can. Many have had hiring freezes for months now, even during the last session. They've actually are looking at ways to freeze up funds that are expected to be used, and looking for those efficiencies. So I have no doubt in my mind that is already happening. What we should have worked on earlier is how do we start tackling this budget deficit, because it's 4.7, but we can argue it could be even larger by the time we get the budget forecast in February. So I would like to hold education harmless. If I had the magic wand, knowing that all of the things that are been happening from the get-go in early childhood, all the pressures there, that not all education funding can fill those gaps, and that you have been filling extra hours, extra PPE. So I know there's going to be hopefully some funding coming from the federal government that will be helpful in HHS and in those areas, but also in education to get us through the pandemic and get people back to work safely. But I do believe there's going to be some fundamental differences of how the approach is. I think we need to be surgical. At least that's going to be my voice in the Finance Committee if I still serve there, of how we can, because Health and Human Services is the biggest part of the budget that's very nuanced, and lots of people look at that budget first to cut and slash. I can predict there's going to be some potential budget shifts in terms of allocation of money and delays of funding. And we've gone through this before. I think I ran on that issue back in 2012, but this time is because we do really have a major global crisis, that we have to look for ways that we can balance our budget, because we have no deficit spending in Minnesota. So I'll leave it at that, but certainly it's going to be a challenge. I look forward to working with everyone, both sides of the aisle, to get this done, because like I said, we have to pass a balanced budget, and we have to make sure that we are prepared to open up safely. So I'm not going to compromise on that. I think we need to do everything it takes to make sure that teachers go to school safely, that students go to school safely, because if we can't open the schools, we can't open the state.
Okay. Any other comments?
I can go next. It's a good question. And I would say the first thing is I think all of us have a role in terms of how we frame this conversation. I would argue that our top priority when we enter the session isn't to balance a budget deficit, it's to protect the Minnesotans that are struggling in this pandemic. And we need to be clear about what Minnesotans are going through economically, what our schools are going through, what our students are going through, and to make sure that we center those voices in our work at the Capitol, and not accept sort of the premise that we're just going to be talking about cuts or a little bit of revenue. We need to make sure the conversation is focused around people. And that's where I think this council and others can have a role at the Capitol. Just last budget cycle, we had a Republican Senate that put out a budget that would have been devastating to our schools. And folks came up to the Capitol and sent emails and advocated for a budget that did well by our schools. And so we're going to kind of need to have that in us again to organize and fight together for a just budget. And that's going to, I'll be blunt, we're going to need to raise taxes. And we should raise taxes on the Minnesotans and the corporations that are doing just fine during this pandemic. And there's a lot of them. And so ready for that fight, because it is going to be a fight. And the more that we can center Minnesotans that have been impacted during this virus, the better we'll be at achieving a good result at the end of the day.
Thank you.
I'll
Anyone
go
else?
next then. Yeah, this is Steve Elkin. So
Yeah.
You reinforce what Melissa and Mike have already said. I served on the state government finance committee in the House in the last term. And you would think that, with a committee with a name like that would have overall budget visibility. And in fact, that committee in the House only has jurisdiction over the state constitutional offices and kind of general government agencies like Minute and Management and Budget and Department of Administration. And so it actually only has purview over about 10% of the state's general fund budget. So, half of it goes to, education, a quarter of it goes to health and human services. So when you take into account the federal share of health and human services funding, as Melissa said, that's the overall spending in health and human services actually is much larger than education. But so just doing, cutting state agency budgets just doesn't cut it. There's just not enough money there. So even though the Walz administration is already working on, cuts to the budgets of the departmental administrations, that's not where the money is. So whatever the solution is, I think as Mike said, we have to be in the middle of a pandemic, holding health and human services and education harmless. You don't want to be cutting Medicaid's funding in the middle of a pandemic, and none of us wants to cut education funding when we know. We're expecting you to tell us more about this. That you guys are under a great deal of stress trying to figure out how to educate our students under all of these restrictions that you're facing. In terms of where's the money going to come from? State revenues have actually been running about $200 million a month above the last forecast that was done. So when the next forecast is presented to us in early December, we could be in much better shape or much worse shape. I think it's almost a given that right now there's about $450 million, I think roughly, that is going from the general fund budget, the sales taxes on auto parts and the like that are currently going into the highway trust fund. I think we'll need to claw that money back and then backfill it with the gas tax increase that the Republicans hate, but I think is inevitable. The transportation funding is going to be way down anyway, just because people aren't driving as much during the pandemic. So that there, a gas tax increase to help backfill for shifting money from transportation back to the general fund to help support education is probably on the table. As Melissa said, we're counting on the federal government to step up to the plate and help state and local governments balance their budgets this year. And then it's just been distressing to me, but in the conversations I'm hearing, it's taken as almost a given that the same what I refer to as shifts and gimmicks that were used during the last downturn. So in other words, things like paying the school districts on the first day of the next fiscal year instead of the last day of the current fiscal year. It's sounding like that's probably on the table again. That's very disconcerting to me. But last week I attended the annual meeting of the Minnesota Center for Fiscal Excellence, which is a tax policy group that's funded by Minnesota businesses. A group that definitely has a business tilt to it, but is basically does good work that's intellectually honest. And during the course of the meeting, they asked their attendees at their Zoom annual conference how they thought that the budget should be balanced, and the most popular option was a combination of taxes, cuts, and shifts and gimmicks. And this is from a largely business audience. And so I think in the end, the business community will step up, through the chamber and the business partnership to help us promote a balanced solution to balancing the budget that it includes all of the above.
Thank you, Representative Elkins. Any other comments? Let's go on to the next issue, the legislative issue here. Minnesota, again, will be the only state in the union with split legislature, with the GOP maintaining a slim Senate majority and the DFL controlling the House. While Minnesota legislators have come together on a few recent bills, mainly police reform and state bonding, and I know that all of you have been involved in one way or the other in that discussion. So, but no agreement appears to have been achieved on the state's handling of the pandemic. Any comments?
Well, I'll just say a little bit about that. I think that we will face having this split government, some similar challenges to the past 4 years. I think that it should be a common, we should be looking out for a common collective good in terms of recovering from the pandemic, and we should have our eyes on who is most impacted by the pandemic and how can we get through this without further impacting them and with helping them get through it. And I hope that the Republican majority, they'll come into the session with similar goals, and we will try to do our best to work together. But it is challenging because we in the past have found that they have come into the sessions with kind of fixed ideas about what's possible and what we're able to explore, and we haven't been able to bring forward new ideas or Democrat carried bills to address some of the challenges. So I really hope that we can see a change in tone and that we will be able to work together, because we have so many big challenges to face, and we know that school districts and education are very challenged and suffering from the effects of the pandemic. So I think it's challenging, and we'll try to do our best.
Good, thank you, Senator Halverson and Wickland. The next legislative issue is the constitutional amendment that was under discussion last session. This was introduced late last session, A bipartisan group of lawmakers supported a bill that would set a higher standard for education in Minnesota through a constitutional amendment. This was led by Minnesota Supreme Court Justice Alan Page and President of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank, Neil Kashkari. The amendment would update the education clause, making a quality education a civil right for all Minnesota children. What are your thoughts, legislators, on this proposed bill, and comment on the likelihood of its passage?
Dennis, this is Rick. Let me intervene. Let's try to have every legislator weigh in on each of the issues, so we
Okay,
hear each of the legislators have a chance to weigh in on each of the issues, please.
okay.
Dennis, I can go first. So this issue, I recall when this was brought forward last year, it got quite a bit of attention, and then of course, COVID hit, and a lot of these conversations were backburnered. I do expect it to be brought up again this legislative session. Honestly, it is an issue that I'll need to invest more time and energy in looking into and determining the implications. This is no small thing, and it I think does require all of our attention in seeing what are the potential benefits, but also what are some of the potential unforeseen negatives as well. So I'm open to hearing what others have to say about it, not being as close to the issue, but I do think it's worthy of mentioning this now so we can prepare for when the debate comes during the 2021 session.
And I can go next, and just to Mr. Kaufman's, tackling each issue, I'll go back to the issue we just raised about having a split legislature. And if the election is over, as far as I'm concerned, and we need to work together, because this is, again, what the voters have said, to have a split legislature, right? That is their wisdom, and that is what we got. But I would say that this weekend is a testament of not how I would like to see the rest of the session going. I was one of the very few that was on the Senate floor and masked appropriately, and I had no idea that some of my colleagues potentially would have been exposed to the virus by certain actions. And I get a call or email or a text almost every day from my childcare, from my kindergarten class, and from my preschool class when there is a potential outbreak, including from places I've been doing my other job outside of the legislature. And that is what we need to do. We need to take this virus and this pandemic seriously so we can put an end to it. But we need to start by trusting each other, and like any other workplace. And I want to be able to trust my colleagues that we're going to do the best thing we can for our state to get through this. So I think just the tensions are a bit high still in the Senate for that particular issue. And on the issue of the constitutional amendment, I have met with Neil Kashkari and Justice Page. He actually swore me in as an attorney when I first got admitted into the bar. So I hold a deep regard to Justice Page and to this issue, because it's in our Constitution that we are going to tax appropriately to fund education. And I take that oath of our Constitution very seriously. I did contemplate that I was asked to sign on to the bill. What I do have concerns about it, and I'm a no vote on the bill if it came up today, is that just because you make something a civil rights complaint doesn't mean everybody has access to the courts. And on top of that, we've seen how much heightened some more notoriety about the Supreme Court and our judges and who appoints a lot of our judges. And it's not always the case that because you send something to the judicial branch that it's going to get resolved. That sometimes it's really about the legislators who need to do the work to fund education appropriately, to do the work that we can't just punt to the Constitution. So I think we should be held accountable as people elect us to do that work. And I am more than any other time in my life committed to find out how we can appropriately fund education so that we, as this pandemic has shown, close all those gaps that we have in our health and human services, in our mental health, in our counselors, and in our food system, where the schools became the crisis center, right, of this pandemic, and you guys have stepped up to the plate, and we need to make sure that we support you. So I don't think the Constitution Amendment is going to do that. We need to do the work with you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Other comments?
Steve Elkins, I'll go. So on the previous question, I think that the two proponents are well-meaning. I certainly support the goal. But as Melissa was saying, the term quality is kind of a subjective term, and so we open up the interpretation of that to a whole new set of litigation. The current language in the Constitution which requires a uniform system of educations around the state is already been well litigated. Is the original source of the Minnesota Miracle 50 years ago that caused Minnesota to move most of the funding for local education from local property taxes to the state budget, and it's generally worked well in terms of at least fostering some level of educational equality of resources among school districts, at least in a relative sense. So I think this could again, I think their initiative is very well meaning. It could open kind of a can of worms. And then in terms of the division in the legislature, we're having to go back every month and reapprove the governor's emergency orders. And every month the Republicans complain about how we're giving up our authority. But when we ask them what they would do if they had more of a say, the answer is, of course, just open things up. And that's not what we need to be doing right now, clearly. So I don't see, we kind of have a stalemate right now, but the stalemate works in favor of the governor, continuing to exercise his authority and discretion in terms of how our response to the coronavirus is going to be handled. And I think on the whole, the administration has been doing well at managing that. And so I don't see the current stalemate status quo being changed.
Okay.
I can
Senator,
go.
Okay.
Sure. So
Yeah,
to the first question about divided government and COVID, it is frustrating and challenging to see a path, at least in the current framework, of a productive working relationship around COVID, because the Senate Republican caucus has refused to take COVID seriously, both in their words and their actions. I mean, it's tough not to be infuriated when you hear about their caucus having a 150-person party with no masks, a super spreader event, and not even having the decency to tell their colleagues or the workers at these hotels. So, I mean, it's kind of beyond the pale, honestly. And but I guess if you're looking for a positive, I guess what I would say is during our last special session, some of the rhetoric, if not the action, has changed for senators as they realize the scope of the surge, or at least they realize how people perceive this surge. And Dennis, you mentioned the Alex Smith Insulin Affordability Act.
yes.
We didn't pass that with bipartisan support out of the goodness of the hearts of the Senate Republicans. We passed by organizing and fighting for change. And so we've got a role, I think, to push and advocate with our community to fight for better policies. And then on the constitutional amendment, it pains me to be on the other side of an issue than someone as revered as Alan Page, but I really think it's a constitutional cop-out. In the sense that if we really want to do right by our schools and our kids and reduce the opportunity gap, we should fully fund our schools. We should invest in affordable housing for all. We should invest in affordable and equitable childcare. I think there are policy solutions narrow the opportunity gap, and I don't think the constitutional amendment is the way to go.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'll just speak to the question about the constitutional amendment. And I, not being on the education committee when it came up last year, wasn't fully involved, but from what I have learned, I think we absolutely do need to address educational disparities that we have in our state. And we have not done our job in terms of providing the full funding needed. I agree with Mike on the issue. We haven't fully funded our schools. We haven't fully funded support systems for students within the schools, counselors, support personnel that could be absolutely making a huge difference in the lives of children. And so this constitutional amendment, I don't see it having a path to making the change. We need to have the legislature needs to address this as we can do by providing adequate or fully funding it. I also have concerns, some of the language that had to do with how schools would be measured. I don't think that is appropriate to use some kind of standardized test to measure our schools or compare them. I think that's been a great detriment to our school systems to have so much emphasis on standardized testing and trying to make comparisons that aren't valid comparisons at all. So I think the discussion will probably happen, but I think I have a lot of questions that I would want to hear. And at this point, I wouldn't be able to support that amendment.
Thank you, Senator. Actually, you've covered many points of the next item that we had on our list was to discuss the COVID-19. You've already been doing that in this, mixing that response with the response from the constitutional amendment. But if you bear with me, let me read the statement or the question that we were posing on the COVID, and if it stimulated any other additional thought. And that is, okay, it's due to the more dramatic surge in cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. School systems have shifted to all distance learning, and like Bloomington, some have suspended winter sports and activities. This is one of the areas where the legislators remain split on how Governor Walz and the state manages the pandemic. As legislators, I think you were already talking about it. You are already expressing, if you have what we can expect from this during this session. So if there are any other thoughts, you could add that now. And there's another aspect to this question that might be a little nuanced, and that is, what would this latest surge do to our ability to advocate for public education? There's a little bit of a difference here that might awaken more questions. So I'll just leave it there with you.
Well, I think a lot of us are just hoping that we leave some time at the end here so that you can, talk to us about what you're experiencing and what you need from us in this coming session.
Okay. Okay, good.
I'll jump in too. You mentioned, Dennis.
I can't hear.
Senator, you muted, Franzen?
You muted yourself instead of unmuting yourself.
Could you repeat what you just said, please?
Melissa, you're muted.
There you go. Am I still muted? There's a little delay when I press the unmute. Okay, good. I was just going to say that I don't believe we're split on opening schools. I think we're 100% on board that we all have to open schools. The question is, what's the prioritization? We keep having bars open where people can get infected, and we have schools that have to shut down because the adults in the room are not acting like adults and taking mitigation efforts. So it's a prioritization, and it's not just about the governor, because I've been critical about some of the decisions because I was elected to represent my district. So is everybody on this call, and we want to be part of the solution. So I think we have some agreement there. It's like, what are you offering to fix that, right? If you just want blatant opening, it's not working because people are not taking the recommendations from our scientists and our healthcare person and experts seriously. So I disagree that there is a split between opening schools, want to open schools, advertising bars over schools. We have to certainly reprioritize schools first and foremost. I think we'd be in alignment if we started with that.
Thank you,
I would-
Senator.
I would echo what Senator Franzen had to say. And also, I guess, and this is where I would like to hear from folks. I mean, I feel, the governor has walked a fine line between making decisions on behalf of the whole state and putting some of that control with local school boards, et cetera. But on something like whether school sports should continue, it's my perception that our local districts have been put in an immensely challenging position. And there's a few of these areas, especially with the surge, where I think you could argue for a little bit more direction from the state level to provide clear guidance. And so I'd be interested in hearing more about what that has felt like from the local level in terms of getting guidance from the state versus sort of having the authority and power to make your own decisions. It's certainly a double-edged sword.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'll just add that I'd be really interested in understanding more about, what are the key issues you're facing and where can we have a positive impact by any policy changes or continuing policy changes that have been put in place through the governor's emergency powers. That has him having the powers has allowed him to put in place some policies that I think are very sensible and very needed. And if the emergency powers just go away, and some of these policies revert to normal times, I think that will have a big impact on our communities. And so I'd like to understand from you, from a school district perspective, what are some of the policies that we most want to see continue as we go forward. As we had heard about sports, I'd like to hear more about sports and activities. How do you see that playing out in terms of who gets to decide or who is deciding, what path to take on some of those activities? And then where do you see the most need in terms of additional funding and priorities going forward in that area as well? So I hope that we can have a chance to hear from you on those topics. So, thanks.
Okay.
Dennis, this is Jim Sorum, board member. Director.
Yeah.
This is an interesting and ironic situation too, because when the COVID first came out and President Trump said he was going to lead and he wanted to do this, this, and that, and then all of a sudden the states kind of said, no, let us handle it ourselves. Well, we're getting on almost the same situation where we're looking to the governor for guidance, and the state of Minnesota Education Department and the state health department, the three of them together are offering guidance, but districts are trying to do their own thing to the satisfaction of the parents and students. Unfortunately, one of the other aspects is private schools aren't involved in any of this control or guidance by the governor. So when it comes to sports, we have an awful lot of the private schools and conferences, and they're okay to play the sports and activities and arts. And when we talk about activities, all of the bands, the drama, the speech contests, everything that we have in our schools is part of the activities and arts. And with the music, and sports is just one element of it. So when we have so many students participating in so many of those activities, it's really hard to make a decision from the board level about this is what we should do for safety as well as for the students' mental health and well-being. Articles in the paper have been stressing the fact that North Minneapolis and Minneapolis kids who are online, they maybe check in or they maybe don't check into the school, but they're out in the streets and they're gathering together like kids like to do. So we've got so many different aspects that we have to try and deal with. So when it comes to the board making a decision, we have decided that we weren't going to allow the kids to participate in sports. And then we got a lot of emails and a lot of phone calls and a lot of other districts, Minnetonka, and I think Edina finally decided they weren't going to go to allow winter sports, but so many of them have. And then they're saying, well, now we have to reschedule. We have to do a lot of stuff. So it's really difficult. And I guess I'm asking for the governor to be, hey, this is what we're going to do. And with the state board of education and the health department, with all of our trends that we've seen, you know, and the particular guidelines that we've had, we really, as a board, don't want to be left to have to make a decision that's going to really upset our parents and students at the same time. Whereas if we had the one edict, so to speak, coming down, as it stands now, on November 20th, Bloomington District is going into a lockdown. You know, everybody's going to be home, including the staff and the students, and we're supposed to be learning from all of that. Well, that's, you know, been fairly successful. Sorry, Superintendent, but it's been fairly successful, and sometimes it's not been as successful as we want for all of the students that we're trying to please. Amen. That's the end of my sermon. Thank you.
Okay.
Dennis,
Let's move ahead. Yeah, any other comments?
if we could move to the part of the agenda where we have COVID. Dr. Nick Kelley has joined us now from the city, and then we can move to questions and comments from the participants tonight.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Rick, for your suggestion, because that is the next item on the agenda. And we are talking about it from several times during the course of the discussion I've heard tonight. You legislators are asking for information. This is the time that that information can be presented. It will be hearing from Superintendent Les Fujitake and Acting Administrator for Bloomington Public Health, Dr. Nick Kelley, and they will share an update on the school district and the city response to the COVID-19. Well, and so go ahead.
Les, you're muted.
Am I?
Great, sorry.
Did you hear?
Yep, thank you, Chair Kane. Because Dr. Kelley has to go to another meeting, I'm going to go quickly over my things, and I'll be happy to respond to, have a conversation with you about how a public school system is handling the COVID pandemic. But let's say this, our school district enjoys a strong working and strategic partnership with the Bloomington Public Health Department. Most Minnesota cities receive their public health services from their respective county public health departments. Bloomington has been fortunate because for over 44 years, our city has its own public health service. The Bloomington Public Health Department also serves the cities of Richfield and Edina. One of the public health department's roles is to use science to prevent the spread of disease. Therefore, our district consults and collaborates with the Bloomington Public Health Department, especially the interim administrator, Dr. Nick Kelley, to address this pandemic. Another of the public health roles is to keep the community well informed so community members can make informed health choices. Therefore, I've asked Dr. Kelley to use this time for this agenda topic to share the latest COVID health information of our city and our school district. Dr. Kelley, please.
Thanks, Superintendent Fujitake. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody. My name is Nick Kelley. I'm the acting public health administrator for the city of Bloomington. And as Superintendent Fujitake noted, we get the privilege of serving Bloomington, Edina, and Richfield residents, like some of you. I just wanted to recap what Superintendent Fujitake noted. One of our values and one of the things we've enjoyed spending the last 44 years working with is our school district. And we share a lot of the same common values, trying to create environments that allow us to raise some of the best minds in the world right here in Bloomington. We spend a lot of time working with the district on early childhood and collaborating very intensely that way and supporting young families growing up and developing here in Bloomington. But as you're well aware, COVID has disrupted almost every aspect of our life. I was previously just on our city council meeting talking about our emergency declaration. So as of November 7th, we're at 81 cases per 10,000 over the last 7 days as of November 7th. For some context, the highest we saw in our spring and early fall waves was around 20 cases per 100,000 over a 7-day rolling average. So we're well over 4 times the transmission in the community that we've ever seen here in Bloomington, and it's rapidly accelerating. We've talked a little bit about sports, and today the state also highlighted that sports has played a role in about 10% of cases associated with schools. Well, our school district has done an amazing job in keeping our staff and students safe, but sports is playing a pretty substantial role. So when we looked back at our data for the 3 cities we serve, 15% of our school-aged children, so 5 to 18, had sports as an exposure prior to their COVID diagnosis. When we look back, how that's changed, in June, that was about 12%. In October, that jumped to 21%. And so we're seeing a growing and an increasing contribution of sports to school age cases, which is complicating our ability to do education. I expect we're going to see some changes on that level, but that is one of the challenges we see with controlling COVID at the community level. A lot of our actions are causing changes and challenges. And I think in these challenging times, it's really important to look forward, look to the future. Today, we heard about another vaccine that's exciting with extremely high efficacy being reported. We have a light at the end of the tunnel. We know that there are going to be better days ahead, but we know the next couple of months are going to be really challenging. And one of the things that I've encouraged the school district, I've encouraged our city council to look at is, how do we take some of our lessons learned today and make the future better? One of the resounding things we've seen in our contact investigations is the challenge of people not having paid sick leave and being forced to work, and the challenges that cause. There's policy options around these things. Same thing with early childhood education and childcare. Remember the scramble and the challenges people had getting access to those services. Thinking about early childhood development and education, how are we building that future and taking care of our most valued assets in the community, our young kids, and building that future bright? There's lots of opportunities in this challenging time to think about the future. Think about how we invest and build a better future for our children and our communities as our country, our community, our local area starts rethinking how we live and thrive with this COVID reality. And then as we look at educational achievement and some of those challenges, we have opportunities to rethink things, whether it's healthcare, education, public health. How we did business and operated from a policy standpoint in January of 2020 does not mean we have to operate the exact same way. We can be innovative and look for unique opportunities to accelerate some of the work we see in our communities. So I didn't want you to have just things are bad, but we have the ability to fix some things in the future. And the next couple of months are going to be hard. There's no getting around that. But with some strategic thought and partnerships, we can really build a better future.
Thank you, Dr. Kelley. Any
Dennis,
questions, anybody?
Yeah, Dennis, a quick question for Dr. Kelley. Realizing that the next few months will be can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Realizing that the next few months will be difficult, with hopefully a rollout of a vaccine or vaccines next spring, not knowing the timeline, but when that were to happen, what role do school districts play in finding an equitable way of immunizations of students? Knowing that it's a priority to get kids and teachers back into the classroom, what does that look like? I mean, this is going to be the largest immunization in the world's history. Is there some planning going into like what those next future steps look like?
Thank you for that question. Yes, there is a tremendous amount of planning, but also a whole lot of uncertainty. So one of the challenges we're looking at from a public health standpoint is how are we taking a role of assurance and making sure that the priority populations identified by the federal government and the state are vaccinated in a timely manner. So a lot of that is partnership, and then us on the backside making sure that those things are actually happening. On the prioritization level, you see school staff prioritized at a higher level than you would see the students. And so I would anticipate more of that widespread availability for students to be more in the fall timeframe. And as we work through those prioritizations and the vaccine distribution and process, as you noted, this is going to be one of the largest mobilizations of immunizations our country's ever seen. And that is going to take some resources, some dedication, and some structures in place that we are still waiting to figure out what that looks like. So there's some federal dollars that have been requested to support that action. There's some of that money, a small amount is already come into Minnesota and is in the process of being distributed to community health boards across the state and our healthcare system to help support that. That's going to be a down payment, if you will, on the process that's going to have to occur over the next several months. It's going to be remarkable if this process works well. And one of those challenges is there's a lot of distrust and confusion. I'm incredibly confident in the process for authorizing the vaccines. When I'm eligible to get it, I will be getting it. I have no questions in my mind about that, and my family will too. It's something that we're looking forward to from the public health standpoint of supporting our school district partners with the nursing staff they have there, making sure that we get the key staff vaccinated in the prioritization to take care of our community.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Dennis, I'll ask one. So a question, this is Steve Elkins. If we're able to get the teachers and staff that vaccinated in the spring, but not yet the students, would it still be at that point possible to go back to at least some kind of a hybrid learning? Because my understanding has been is that the main limiting factor has been the availability of teachers who are willing to go into an in-person classroom setting.
It's entirely possible. The biggest challenge, and I think many districts, Bloomington included, realized as case rates go up in the community, operational challenges increase. And so pandemics, infectious diseases follow patterns. It's going up very fast right now. It's going to come down. And when it comes back down, our ability to maintain it down is based on tried and true public health strategies. Vaccine is one of those tools. It is not the tool, but it's one of the multiple layers of mitigation that we have to keep our schools safe and our community with low rates of spread. It's going to help immensely, but many places are doing it successfully now without a vaccine around the world. We have really solid public health strategies that, when well applied, can control this thing and give us time until we have a vaccine.
I have a question. This is Mike Howard. often schools can be sort of the front lines when families are experiencing economic challenges, housing insecurity, food insecurity. And my guess is that it's more challenging to sort of have those connections with distance learning happening. But is there anything that that you would tell us about what you're sort of hearing anecdotally or otherwise from families about just sort of the economic challenges that are facing families with children, in particular food insecurity or housing insecurity?
The challenges we're hearing, I think, are unfortunately just beginning. When you look at the substantial amount of funding and support that's been provided with, from the city level, with the support we've provided to VEEP and how much money they've put out into the community for housing and the amazing work they're doing with food, the district has done amazing work providing food to thousands and thousands of family members in the community. That kind of gives you an insight into the challenge. One of those concerns is we have a lot of individuals in our apartments, our multi-unit family housing. The reality for them with distance learning and isolation with an infectious disease is they're trying to respond to strategies that work really well for people that own homes. And you can't isolate an apartment. You can't have 3 kids learning in front of a Chrome pad or a Chromebook while somebody's working right next to them. It is a challenge. And I think those things are just going to continue to be magnified as the length of this pandemic continues. The challenge we keep hearing over and over again is I can't follow some of these guidelines because I have to go to work and get paid. And then you have people that can't work because of childcare. Those 2 structural issues, if we can get around with some solutions, it will immensely help.
Representative Howard, the state received $5 million, a grant for $5 million to provide food for families. It was a competitive grant. We applied, we competed, and we received 12% of that funding for our community. So we received more than our share because we competed, because the need is there. And it's, as Dr. Kelley said, it's growing. And we're going to continue to compete and search for grants like this so we can, and we're partnering with VEEP to get these monies out to the community members.
Thank you. Thank you both.
I had a question. What do you see happening as we end this year? We're coming up not too far from the end of 2020. How much of your additional funding or extra funding for some of these supports will be used in 2021, or is it going to be ending? And what could you say about what specific supports you might need early in the year? I mean, we hope that the federal government will take action. It's absolutely critical that they do, but what are we looking at if we don't have a source? Does some of the support funding just end at the end of December?
I'll respond to Senator Wickland. We received 2 blocks of grants from the feds, the state did, and the school districts did receive their proportionate share of those grants. The first grant is going to end. The monies need to be spent by 12/31 of this year. The rest of the money is to be spent by, I believe, September of 21. Okay, so end of this year, calendar year, September 21 would be the other one. We have committed to spend all the money for this year. That's going to be expiring at the end of this calendar year. And we have the money set aside to be spent for next year. So we have monies budgeted to stretch over that time period. We've also applied, we're one of a few school districts that applied for FEMA funding for some of our, because this is an emergency. And we're waiting to hear back whether they're going to provide us that funding. I think we're one of a few districts in the state that has applied for FEMA funding. So we're doing okay financially. I hope that the federal government comes through with more funding. We need it. We're going to need it.
On the public health end, our funding at the state level has already been used, and our CARES dollars that we had access to at the city level, we've needed to be expended by November 15th. So we know there's a little bit of funding coming for vaccination, but otherwise, all of our additional funding to do public health strategies and actions is dependent upon additional state or federal funding or allocation at the local level.
One more thing, everyone. Dr. Kelley needs to run to another meeting, so he has what? How many more minutes do you have with us, Dr. Kelley?
A couple more minutes.
Okay, so if you have questions for him before he leaves, please.
I just have a quick question. I guess it's more a broader question about how to talk about this for Dr. Kelley. When you have people, including leadership and political elected leaders, talking about you have to learn to live in COVID, how do you respond to this? And how do you do it in a way that's non-partisan, non-combative, but how do we live with COVID from now until the fall from a health perspective? And you alluded to it, but if you can help us, guide us as leaders so we can use the right language so people can trust us, because we're really hurting on credibility, and I'm sure all of us are, because of how misinformation has been spread out on this pandemic.
I think one of the best things we can do is look to people that are doing it well. And one of the best strategies that I've seen for this is from Dr. Mike Ryan, who is leading the response for the World Health Organization. And he talks about asking himself 3 questions. What can I do to prevent myself from getting COVID today? What can I do to prevent myself from unintentionally giving somebody else COVID today? And then what can I do to be kind? We all are very familiar with our core public health strategies of, keeping distance, keeping that 6 feet, that social distance, wearing a face covering, a mask, staying home when you're sick. Soon it's going to include getting a vaccine and keeping mindful of how you're in places with cramped, crowded quarters with poor ventilation. That's where we see a lot of spread occurring. We know these things. It's a daily choice. Am I going to do them? And how am I going to protect others by taking those actions on myself? And then that act of kindness in our challenging times today, that act of gratitude, the act of grace and caring you can provide to your neighbors is something that can unify us around this challenge of living with COVID.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Kelley, thank you for joining us. I know you have to run. I want to go back to a question that was posed earlier about the response to the pandemic by our schools, by our school system. The role of we earlier talked about the constitutional amendment. The Constitution says the duty of the legislature is to establish a general and uniform system of public education, and that's your role. And you fulfilled that role, and your response to the response to the pandemic from the state really comes from the executive branch. They set out guidelines through their departments of health and education to guide the education systems on how to respond to this pandemic. They've published safe learning guides, planning guide for schools. They've come up with guidelines for us. And the Department of Health has also told us to study county data, city data, and that's why we work with Dr. Kelley to study all these things to make our decisions. It's very clear often what they want and what their guidelines call for. They tell us how to develop an instructional delivery model. We look at that, then we look at our staffing, our facility needs, our programming, everything. And when 90% of our costs are in labor, staffing. We have to look at that because we have to look at childcare, substitutes, and all these things. And we've done all that in making our decisions, and we've really followed the guidelines. The challenge is when guidelines are not enforced, then they just become suggestions. And that's what's going on. And when guidelines are unevenly followed, it creates confusion and distrust. And that's what we have. It's not, I don't know what you can do about that, but that's the challenge that we have. Even with this sports thing, it's the same deal. The guidelines are clear. We followed the guidelines. It says if you move from distance learning and you're required to move it because of your COVID case rates, you should shut down your sports. We did that. And then everybody else says, well, how come they're not doing it? And I'm not going to answer for other school districts. The only way we're going to get our kids back in schools earlier is if we do it in a uniform collective action as a team. And that's what Dr. Kelley keeps reminding me of. We need to work together and not be self-serving. And so that's the challenge. And I really appreciate the city's action in coming out with this thing because they're taking it seriously too. Richfield did the same thing. They stood up and they took action. Appreciate what they did in Richfield, the Richfield School District. But that's our challenge, is this guidelines are not being followed and they're not being enforced. I'm not sure what you can do about that. Any questions? Oh yeah, I'm not the chair, I'm sorry. Chair Casey.
Mr. Kane, can I follow up with another comment in that
Yes,
same area?
by all means.
Okay. So then the other difficult part is when we're looking at, we can control what a school district, our school district response. But I'm going to go back to athletics, for example. So if we are telling our sports that are connected to a school district that they cannot run, but club sports are not under that same situation and they can run, it's very much a double standard. So if you are a participant connected to a school community, you can't play your sport, but if you're a participant connected to a private club, you can. So that's a conflict that we're seeing a lot in our community right now in our decision making. So having a unified response that encompasses all of youth sports or all of youth sports is just one example, right? We could put that in a lot of different places. That would be very, very helpful. And as Superintendent Fujitake mentioned, it's more executive decision making. I don't know what legislatively you have in that, but if you do have the governor's ear, MDE, MDH, to just help with that double standard or contradiction, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Another thing, the Metropolitan Public Health Association, which Nick is a member of, he drafted a letter for them to the governor, to the executive branch, expressing this concern that they need to take action collectively, not just on school sports, but on club sports, community sports too, because the spread is there. And if we do not address it, it's going to continue unchecked and continue to grow. I think all of you know this, there's so much spread going on in these areas. I want to take another thing, an opportunity here since I have you here. As far as the budget deficit coming up, one strategy often is to look at funding that only some districts enjoy. And then they go, get benefit by. So it's an easy thing to claw back because not all school districts are getting that revenue. And then they look at clawing back. But often that revenue is given to school districts because of need, because of justification, like the age of our buildings or the poverty rate in our school district, or the number of EL students we have. We need to be very careful about that we do not just do this, just claw back these monies and not touch. Anyway, you know what I mean. That could help us with that. And if you need more information about that, I'll be happy to share the kinds of fundings that we get that we deserve and why it's needed. And the return on investment of that funding.
Yeah, Les, can you send us some an email or with some links or something?
Oh, I'll be happy to represent.
Director Starks?
Thank you. So in the same line of funding, I did want to bring up a specific bill that was brought up at the October special session. It was not brought up this month, but the anticipation is you'll see it again in December. So it's Representative Davney. It's House File 16 for those of you in the House. The bill was to allow for school districts to be funded based on their 2019-2020 enrollment numbers instead of their 2020-21 enrollment numbers. In Bloomington, we have lost 364 students this year. And that is a loss of $3.6 million for our school district. And we are not in any way, shape, or form the only school district that lost students this year. In fact, I think we, especially in some of our local Twin Cities school districts, we might be one of the lower losses of a percentage of our enrollment. So it's something that is going to be vitally important for Bloomington Public Schools, but I think for all public school systems. We can't control a significant loss like that. And with all of the expenses that we have related to educating in a pandemic, a loss of $3.6 million is devastating. So if Representative Davney brings that back in December, I would encourage you all to support it or at least consider that. Also, from the Senate side, I believe Senator Uyghur was bringing forward a companion bill, but I don't know officially if that's happening on the Senate side. So I don't know if any of you have had a chance to know about this bill or talk about it before, but if you have any comments, I'd appreciate it.
And are we losing them to homeschooling, or where do we think they're going?
So Mr. Kaufman, I believe, gave us the breakdown at our last board meeting. I have the breakdown here. It was 60% private schools, 20% homeschool, and 20% other districts. That was the breakdown that we were given at our last board meeting. Does that sound correct, Mr. Kaufman? Okay.
And along those lines of funding for the budget session, I've heard from one of the 4 districts that I represent in SD 49 that some districts might want to request funding for summer programs to make up for a semester or the school year, and would like your thoughts. If not, I'm assuming you would too. I just wanted to know what Bloomington Public Schools is looking in terms of that, because I think that would be good if all districts are looking in that direction to be a bigger ask to support you.
Senator Franzen, we've talked about this. It's going to be a balance between academics and social emotional recovery of families and students. So we're looking at how can we, hopefully we can get together and provide some hope for community members and do some healing, because there's going to be a lot of healing needed, not just about health issues, but also just the social unrest and everything else. And so we're looking at that. How can we get together as a community, everyone, and work together? This is social capital, everybody. Social capital is a value of people working together, leaders working together to build stronger communities. And that's what we need to do right now, is plan ahead. Even though we're in the midst of the pandemic, we need to start looking ahead of how we're going to come out of this and give hope to everybody that we're going to have a better community, stronger community from this thing. And we should start planning now and coalesce all the people together and start looking ahead, because it's going to be a balance between academics and social emotional supports. And I hope I can count on all of you to come together to do this. So, and since I have everybody's here, I want to talk about the constitutional amendment. It calls for the right to a quality public education and to ensure quality public schools. The question is, how do you define? Somebody brought it up earlier. What is quality? And if it's going to be measured by standardized testing, I have a real concern with that. And they've never defined that, because that's going to lead to somebody else's comment about litigation and all these other things. It's just going to get mired down in just one long argument. So nobody asked. I'll sit back.
I just wanted to add just a couple things in terms of the bill that Heather, you brought up about the funding for being held at last year's student count. And I know that Senator Uyghur and I believe maybe a Republican authored something similar this past session last week. And we will try to see that, make sure it's introduced again in December. And I can, express my concerns to leadership and ask colleagues to do that as well. But what we really need is the leaders need to come to, have the discussion about taking action on it in December. We've just had so little opportunity to raise up bills, and it really has to come through the leaders agreeing that they will bring it up. And it definitely makes sense to me that we address it, right away and keep this from getting to be a greater problem. But we have to convince the leaders that it's something urgent and does need to be taken care of.
We have a few minutes remaining for our meeting this evening, and I would like to invite Board Chair Nellie Corman to make a few closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Can you hear me well? I'm feeling like an echo here. Okay, I don't have any special remarks, but I just want to say that, we have so many things that come together alongside with this topic of COVID. And if you have heard me before, I have said several times that education is the base of healthy, prosperous, successful societies. And so, and that remains the same for me. And when we talk about education and when we talk about our schools, we are providing not only academics, but we're also providing a number of services. So all those things, all those issues that you discuss at the legislature, they're all related to our students, every single one of them. When we're talking about housing, when we're talking about health, transportation, all of those different things affect our communities. For our students, so important for them to be able to return to the classroom. And while they're not in the classroom, one of the things that I always worry about is reliable internet connection. Thankfully, we are able to provide hotspots and devices to our students thanks to our referendum. But still, even if you're able to pay for your internet, it does not guarantee that it's not going to fail in the middle of a class. So that's something that I would ask from you to continue to look into. Our communities, we have over 50% of our student population being students of color. And the impact of COVID in our communities of color. So that is concerning. When we're talking about having our students in the classroom, we're also looking into, who are those who are the most vulnerable within our communities. And this problem, goes beyond COVID. Once COVID, it's been taken care of from the health side, all the stuff that is left behind, all the remaining, like Superintendent Fujitake talked about, social emotional recovery. And there's going to be a big load too of academics recovery because of the difficulties that we had this year on being able to provide. Well, we try, we have worked hard in Bloomington schools to continue to provide good academics to our students, but still there will be more that will be needed to do. When it comes to our teachers, I know that one of you mentioned about the willingness of our teachers to return to the classroom, and I just want to clarify that our teachers are willing to be in the classroom. Of course, everybody wants to be in the classroom, and our students want to be in the classroom, and everybody deserves to be there. But what COVID does then is put our staff, our adults at risk, as you know. And so then we are put in this position where we easily start running out of staff and people that can be in there covering classes. And just to end, the importance of continuing to work together, you address that, how important it is that we work together. And so please continue to reach out to our administration for more information More information also on support services. While our students are not necessarily in schools, there's a number of support services that are being provided. So please reach out to our administration, and please continue to reach out to our members of the school board when you have any questions. And once again, just thank you for being with us tonight, and thank you for your continued support, and thanks in advance for all the hard work that you're going to be doing advocating for our students, our families, and for public education. Thank you. Mr. Kane.
In echoing Chair Corman's remarks, tonight has been our first opportunity this session to hear from our legislators and discuss legislative proposals that we believe have an impact on Bloomington public schools. If there should be a further need, we would be pleased to schedule similar future meetings. And in closing, thank you, legislators. We know you have very busy schedules right now, and we appreciate the time that you've taken to be with us tonight. We look forward to your continued work in the House and in the Senate. Thank you to our advocacy council members for their time and commitment to this important work, and for those staff who joined us this evening. We look forward to the upcoming session and working closely with all of you on these important matters. Have a good evening.
Franzen has
Thank you. Thank you.
Senator Franzen has her hand up. You muted, Dennis.
Senator.
We're good. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's an old hand up.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you to the council too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's the only time we get to see each other.